On this day, in 1773, Great Britain passed the Tea Act, which is probably one of the most stereotypically British-sounding pieces of legislation I ever did hear. So, what was the Tea Act, and what did it lead to? Well, the Act gave the British East India Company a monopoly on tea sales in the American colonies. Now, the British East India Company was founded in 1600, and they were probably the most powerful corporation that has ever existed. They had their own army and navy. They essentially travelled the world conquering and colonising in the name of trade and for the crown for about 200 years. They honestly could not have been bigger villains had they tried. They were involved in trafficking people as part of the slave trade. They financed the tea trade by illegally selling opium to people in China. You've heard of the Opium Wars. They hoarded grain, which resulted in the Bengal famine of 1770, and it killed millions of people. But at least we got to have silk and spices in Britain, eh? Anyway, the British East India Company had found itself in debt for a number of reasons. There were wars, unstable markets, they had to pay the British government a contract fee of about £400,000 a year, which is quite a lot now. So the British government decided to help out the East India Company by giving them a monopoly on tea in the Americas. The Act actually made tea cheaper in the Americas, and it's a bit complicated. I might not have got the ins and outs fully down, but essentially the East India Company didn't have to pay tax, but the Americans did when it arrived at their country. Britain had been pushing their luck a bit when it come to imposing taxes for goods, leading to people refusing to pay under the argument of no taxation without representation. And people resisted the initial tea imports. They would make ships turn round and head back to Britain because they saw this as a very slippery slope of piss-taking. In November 1773, a ship called the Dartmouth docked in Boston Harbour. Now, the law said that the Americans had to pay for the tea within 20 days, otherwise it would be unloaded anyway and confiscated by customs officials. The governor of the Massachusetts colony refused to let the ship leave or unload until they paid import duty. As the 20-day deadline drew near, on the 16th of December 1773, a group of 30 or 130 men from a group called the Sons of Liberty disguised themselves as Native Americans, and they boarded the Dartmouth, throwing 342 chests of tea into the harbour. 92,000 pounds of tea was destroyed, enough to keep one family in Lancashire going for 2 months. This incident became known as the Boston Tea Party. 2 years later, the American Revolutionary War of Independence started, and it wasn't directly because of tea, but it certainly played a part. Anyway, I'm going to go and have a look at what Trump's doing with these tariffs now. Thank you so much for watching. Why not subscribe, and I'll see you tomorrow.